son Senwosret the first. We're going to talk about them and begin to just spend a little bit more time on this whole idea around the 12th dynasty, because there's just some fascinating things going on here. And I want to kind of set the stage here and first remind you, just before I get started, or just ask you, I get the question sometimes, how can you support? Some people ask, how can I support you? How can you support me? Well, some ways you can support: you can go to Amazon, Danita Smith. I have several stories about Black history, books that are available, as well as the Adventures of Tahari Amin. They Can't Pull Us Up, Harriet Tubman, Her Life, and 10 Things Your Child Should Know. So you look under Danita Smith, have several resources there that you can get either on the Kindle app, or really you don't even need a Kindle app. You can read it online. Now you can read your Kindle books right online at Amazon, read.amazon.com, or you can order hard copies of the book from Amazon. For me, Danita Smith, Stories About Black History, or you can give stars or just share this information. One of the biggest things I like for you to do is to share this information and tell people about it. You can tell people about it, show them this information. Let's talk about it, because nobody ever talks about these people and these interesting figures from history. We only really get one side of history. So let's talk about it a little bit today, and let's talk about the human side of the folks here. We're going to talk a little bit about the human sides of people here, just to kind of set things up. So just to give you some bearing here, and I'll ask that you share this with somebody so we can talk about it, and put your comments down below this so we can talk. But the gentleman right here, right above me, in this beautiful statue right here, is Amenemhat the First. He is the founder, the starter, if you will, of the 12th dynasty. So he is living around 2000 BC. He is under the last king of the 11th dynasty, Amenemhat the Fourth. He's under him, and he's an official. He's like a vizier, and he's somebody who comes from a southern area of ancient Kemet, or in the southern part of ancient Kemet, in the southern border, and he ends up taking power. So he becomes a strong man that develops, a significant family himself, and a significant dynasty that lasts for well over 100 years, where his offspring are the ones controlling ancient Kemet. So this is Amenemhat the First here, and his, like I said, his children and his offspring are controlling ancient Kemet for well over 100 years. And this also in the middle here is also another image of him from a lintel that was done in a temple near his pyramid complex. That right there is a stat or a depiction of him as well in the middle there. And then you see over to the far left, or your far right, that you see Senwosret the First, and that is the son. He is the son of Amenemhat the First, and he becomes the ruler and the king once his father passes away. But he actually has some overlapping time. They actually apparently co-rule for a period of time, which is an interesting story. So they become a significant father and son dynamic. And I want to talk about that father and son dynamic here, because you have a situation where it appears, because there are several documents that show Amenemhat as if he was a living king, interacting with his son, and as if his son was also a king and a ruler at that time. You see this interesting thing begin to come about in the Middle Kingdom, where perhaps there is some co-regency, where the idea of two rulers, a father and son, ruling at the same time, overlapping, kind of comes into being and is practiced a little bit more. And you see that somewhat in the Middle Kingdom with these two men right here, these two gentlemen right here. And that's an interesting concept. Imagine being able to take an empire that you're building or that you're running, and to share it with your children, not just to pass it on when you die, but actually to co-rule it with your children, so that you're able to pass it on, so that you're able to teach them before they get to be so old and you're not around anymore, to really help them be able to take the reins of power. This whole idea about a father talking to his son, or your parents talking to their children, was an idea you see in Kemetic literature throughout. The whole idea, whether it's the teachings of Ptah or things that come after, the idea of a father talking to his son, or parents talking to their children, was a significant thing. Or even people who would be, of old age, and they passed away, and they would have their tombs built, and they had like their autobiography written on their tombs for anybody to see literally thousands of years later. And they would say, one of the things they would say about themselves is that I was loved by my mother. I was respected by my father. I took care of their children. I took care of my brothers and sisters. That was a familial thing, that was an area of respect and honor when it comes to ancient Kemet, based on what they said about themselves. So I want to talk a little bit about this father-son dynamic that's there between Amenemhat the First and his son Senwosret the First, because there is a very famous writing that takes place where Amenemhat the First writes something to his son, and it's like an instructions that he's giving to his son. Now, there's some discussion whether or not this was written during Amenemhat the First's time, or was it written right after he died by his son to give honor to his father. We're not 100% sure, because obviously it happened a long time ago, but it was an actual document that survived into the New Kingdom in the 18th dynasty, where many of the scribes were writing down many of the famous pieces of literature and worthwhile pieces of literature, according to them, as a part of their training and for posterity and for history reasons, and as part of their training. And this is one of the documents and one of the stories that were preserved by scribes later on after they lived. But it's pretty sure that it was written during their time frame, whether it was written by him or written by the dad, we're not sure. But in it, Amenemhat the first is talking to his son. And he wants to give his son advice. And he tells his son some very significant things, because apparently during Amenemhat the first's life, there was an assassination attempt on him. I'm not 100% sure if he actually died during that attempt or did he survive, because the document's a little murky there, but someone tried to kill him. And he is, when you're the king, heavy is the head that wears the crown. When you're the king and you're the king of ancient Kemet, all of ancient Kemet. Now he's coming from the south. The 12th dynasty eventually at some point in time moves their capital a little farther north, closer to the Memphite region. You see some of the kings and leaders from the 12th dynasty buried in List a little bit farther north than where they were originally from. But he's talking in his instruction to his son. He tells his son to trust no one. He said, don't trust anybody. Guard your heart. Even when you go to bed at night, guard your own heart. He's saying, don't allow yourself to develop too many close friends. Because he said, the people that I fed the most, the people that I gave bread to and made sure were not hungry, they were the very people who rose up against me and tried to attack me. The people who I gave, incense to smell good and myrrh and things like that, they were the ones who were conspiring against me. You have to be careful, because if you allow yourself as a king to get too close and intimate to people, these might be the very people who will rise up in arms against you. This is the instructions. This is what he's telling his son. And this is kind of what he experienced, right? So he's telling him that. He said, make sure you're a good king. Make sure you lead according to the concept of God. Make sure you lead according to the ideals of God. He said, when I was a king, I made sure that no one was hungry. I was a good steward over the grain. I was somebody who took care of the land to make sure there was enough food for people to eat. And he was saying, and the land was bountiful for me. The land responded by providing enough food, and I made sure people got things that they needed. And we didn't have famine during my time. People did not go hungry and thirsty and experience poverty and hardship because of my leadership. He said, because of the things I did, I handled myself in a great way, and I didn't allow, and I'm telling you not to allow yourself to get too close and too attached to people who might then turn around and off you or rise against you. Make sure you do your job according to honor. Sometimes you have to do your job whether people like you or not. And you have to, and even if this is the very people you're helping. I had a relative of mine talk to me, tell me, this is an older relative, and he said he remembered when he was younger, being in a town that was kind of rural, in a rural part, in a rural town, and the people in the town were talking about Martin Luther King. Now, this is an older gentleman, and he said the people were talking about Martin Luther King. These are black people talking about Martin Luther King in this very rural area, kind of in the South, and they were saying, we don't know if we want him to come here. They were calling him kind of bad names, saying things about him, saying he's going to come and he's going to make things worse for us. He's going to come here, or he's going to come in this area, or come in general in this general area, and it's going to make things worse. He's going to leave, and then we're going to have to catch hell. Heck, if you will. It's because of that. We're going to have to catch it because of that, right? And so, here were people, and I was kind of surprised because this man was saying that people were family members, people he wasn't expecting to think like that, but they were thinking like that. Now, part of it also was because maybe they were afraid of what would happen, but some of them were really mad. Some of the people were really upset at Dr. King, didn't like him, didn't like some of the things he was doing. And these are some of the people who would be helped later on by obviously some of the things that happened in the civil rights movement, who were pushing to get change, probably because they were fearing the violence and the backdrop. And I think about that. I thought about that example. I think about that example when I think about Amenemhat talking to his son, saying, sometimes the very people you want to help, sometimes the very people you feed might be the people who rise up in arms against you. Like, imagine that. Imagine you go to help somebody and they're the ones who snap off your finger or snap off your hand or rise up and club you or stab you or something like that. That could be your experience. So when you begin to rule, when you take on a situation of rulership and authority, do it because of your commitment to God. Do it because of what you're committed to right. Even if people around you don't like it, even if you end up being offed by the people you're trying to help, make sure you have a commitment so that you do your job honorably, so that when you stand before God, you know that you have nothing to fear. You have nothing to be ashamed of. You've lived your life honorably. Make sure that you do that. And I think there were a lot of people in the civil rights movement and in many types of movements who were doing things that other people didn't like, doing things that would have helped the very people who might have been fighting against them, but they had to do it anyway. They were called all kinds of names. They may have been attacked, literally attacked, physically attacked in all kinds of ways, but they went on anyway to do things like Martin Luther King, to do things anyway, even though people might have been hating them, right? So Amenemhat in this story, in this instruction, and you could look up and read it. It'd be an interesting thing to read. In his instruction to his son, Senwosret, he says to him, that one time he went to bed and he was sleepy. And he let his heart, basically follow slumber, because he was very tired. He was weary, and he let his heart kind of follow slumber and follow sleep. And he went into a deep sleep, and he woke up out of his sleep to find that the very weapons that were supposed to be there to guard him were now being turned against him. And that he jumped up from where he was sleeping, and he grabbed whatever weapons he could grab and tried to fight off these people who would be attackers. And he said, but he was almost like a snake in the desert. I guess maybe he was on the ground and they were stabbing or getting him. And he was saying that, I could have fought them all off, but they were difficult, and it's hard to fight alone. Like, no man can fight alone. And so it's not 100% sure if that was an account that his son talked about and he died in that account, or if he was just recalling an actual assassination tip that he survived, right? But there apparently was an attack, some type of attack on Amenemhat the first life, and he fought. And so here is a king of Kemet, right? He's going to be one of the most famous people in the world, right? We're talking about him. It's thousands of years later after his life, after his death, and we're still talking about him. He's going to be one of the more famous people in the world, and he's fighting for his life, right? The heavy is the head that wears the crown. He's fighting for his life, and he's telling his son, this might happen to you. You better be careful, because when you're dealing with this, there's all kinds of politics, there's all kinds of hate, there's all kinds of evil. These things happen. And these can be people all around you. These can be people who are of your same blood. These can be people of your same country, your same bloodline, who might be attacking you. This could happen. So it becomes a significant thing that's talked about and that's remembered with respect to ancient Kemet. And Senwosret the First also kind of obviously honors his father and continues to respect that. One of the other things that happens that's a development in the 12th dynasty under him and under his dad is that there's also several wars that take place. They have campaigns that they take place. There are campaigns that are taking place up and down Kemet, but they're campaigns that take place in Nubia. And when you think about ancient Nubia, you have to know that there's a lower Nubia, which represents the northern part of Nubia, and an upper Nubia that represents the southern part of Nubia. And in the lower part of Nubia, that was on the southern border, literally right there where Kemet was, on the southern border of ancient Kemet. And so these areas just kind of blended together. And during Amenemhat the first time, and in Senwosret the first time, there were battles, there were pushes by the 12th dynasty, in particular in Senwosret the First, to push further into Lower Nubia, to push further into what is today the boundary, almost the boundary between the Sudan and modern day Egypt. So you look right at that northern boundary between the Sudan and modern day Egypt, you begin to see a series of forts being built. And these forts that are being built are built, one by Senwosret the First and some of his successors, some of his family members, and some of the battles that take place are with Amenemhat the First and Senwosret the First and his family members later on. And they begin to build a series of significant forts, not penny ante, fly-by-night forts, some significant marvels, if you will, of architecture that they built. And it is at one of these forts, the fort of Buhin, which is right along that border between Egypt today and the Sudan. It's called the Fort of Buhin. That Fort of Buhin was the first time we've seen in Kemetic writing, in ancient Kemetic writing, the word Cush, the name Cush. In that fort, there's a documentation, there's some information and indication that the god Muntu was delivering to Senwosret the First the people in probably upper Nubia, maybe in the southern part of Nubia, maybe to some extent a little bit in the northern part of Nubia, delivering them into the hands of Senwosret the First, delivering them and saying essentially, here are the people that are fighting against you, and we want to make sure that these are the people that we're gonna get against, and these are people that we're going to be delivered into your hands. And among them, there's a whole coalition of people there. There's a coalition of people there, and amongst the districts that they mentioned, there are like 10 areas that they mention in what would be Nubia. There are 10 areas that they mention, and the first of those areas is Cush. Now it's interesting because we don't have Cush's side of the story. We don't have that whole area side of the story, and we don't know exactly what they call themselves, right? We do know that There were places like Yam, that was in the southern part of Nubia. We know that there were the Wadwet, the Erjet, the Sedju, they're all in the northern part of Nubia. We do know that obviously the ancient empire of Kush rises again after this period of time, after they were subjugated by the new kingdom in Upper Kemet. We do know that even though ancient Kemet during this time with Senusret the first and a little bit thereafter pushed into Lower Nubia and pushed as far as the Second Cataract, which is right inside the border of the modern day Sudan, they push as far as that and a little bit lower. And they're basically saying, hey, we're controlling this area. We're controlling the trade routes. If you want to come here, you got to come through us. And basically, you got to get out your boat and go around and go to the trading post. We're controlling this area. We do know that even farther south there were still people. There were still people who were presumably, we would call Kush, presumably who were a part of a different land, who had their autonomy, who were still doing trading, who were still interacting with people farther south, who still had their own networks, their own religion, their own societies going on, and they were not subject to Kemet at that time, although Kemet was trying to push its way in. And so it's at these series of forts that you see some of this documentation around the ancient Kemetic relationship with Kush, if you will, and the word Kush is first used. You also then begin to see at the end of the 12th dynasty and at the end of the Middle Kingdom, as things kind of fall apart and another intermediate period comes, the people from Kush, that area of southern Nubia, if you will, upper Nubia, begin to push back up into. They take over these forts. The forts are not well manned. They end up taking over the forts and pushing back into lower Nubia and butting right up against ancient Kemet in what is today southern Egypt, butting right up against ancient Kemet and becoming a threat again and exerting their power. So they end up taking over these forts at some period of time and pushing right into lower Nubia, up right up against southern Kemet. So it becomes kind of like a push and pull, but it's a very interesting thing. So if you're looking to read about it, you want to study more about it, and I'll be trying to put things out about it as well. Studying Amenemhat the first and looking at Senusret the first is an important thing. I think they're an important father-son duo. You get to see an example of a father teaching a son about what to do, especially if people are betraying you. How do you handle that? And according to some of the documentation I've read, there aren't very many, if any, other pieces of literature in ancient Kemetic history that talk about from a king's perspective or from a king's voice, if you will, about an attempted murder of a king, right? That wasn't really something you would probably talk about a lot, but it might be the only document that really talks about something of that nature and gives instruction as to how you might deal with it. So whether it was written by him himself or written by his son to honor his dad, we don't know, but it becomes a significant part or interesting part of Kemetic literature to be able to read, as well as to understand as you think about the 12th dynasty and with Senusret the first, their push into lower Nubia and the interactions they begin to have with Kush that they document and use the word Kush. So that whole idea of forts being built with ancient Kemet as they butt up against this empire that's already there in what is today the Sudan, already there around Kerma and those areas around the Third Cataract of now. There's already an empire that been there for years, well over for thousands of years, that already been there, well over 1,000 years. And so you see that play begin to take place by seeing some of these forts and some of the documentation with respect to these forts. So I just wanted to share that. I hope you're having a good day. God bless you. If you have any questions or comments, please put it down below. I'll take a look at it. And thank you so much for listening. God bless you.